Hi everybody, Andy Cooch Cuchilla here, welcoming you once again to another series of westernbass.tv. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about drop shotting. You know, drop shotting is a technique that's used on most of our deep valley canyon lakes. Well, we're going to show you today that this technique, as versatile as it is, it can be used in places like Clear Lake and the California Delta. You know, the real cool thing about drop shotting is that we're able now to present a bait. The way we fish this bait is we have the weight on the bottom, just like Grandpa used to teach us catfishing. Weight on the bottom and our hook and lure up above. What this does is it now presents a bait into a zone that those bass aren't used to seeing. You know, normally we're down there bouncing jigs and Texas rig and we're bouncing it on the bottom, or we're throwing buzz baits and frogs and those fish are looking up when they're in that fishing mode. Now we're presenting a bait right down in where those fish are. It's suspended an inch, 6 inches, 2 feet up off the bottom. Those bass aren't used to seeing a bait sitting in their strike zone for extended periods of time. Very, very effective tool when catching fish, especially out here on the river in Clear Lake when we got all of this grass with these fish, especially in the summertime. We're here in the Delta in July, late July, it's hot. These fish are suspending in the grass, and the drop shot allows us to put that bait in that strike zone and keep it there for extended periods of time. What I'm going to show you today, folks, is a little bit of what I call Bubba drop shotting. I don't do a lot of this on the lake myself. I'm just not real fond of throwing 6 and 8 pound tests, and I have other ways that I can catch fish on certain bodies of water throughout California. But here on the Delta and in Clear Lake, you got to bubba up. And what I mean by bubba up, you got to go with a little bigger and heavier stout rod. I'm generally fishing a 6'6" or 7 foot heavy action rod, and I'm using 16 pound fluorocarbon on everything I throw. Sometimes I'll even go a lot bigger with my hook. I want to present a big 8-10 inch worm. Maybe I want to throw a sweet beaver on a drop shot where I'm pitching and flipping this bait now versus long distance casting or dropping straight down to 60 foot of water. I'm pitching and flipping this thing into shallow, heavy cover. So it's very important that you have a line that not only is very extremely sensitive, but also strong and durable. So sometimes I'll even use like 20 pound tests. Most of my applications, I'm using a 16 pound fluorocarbon. The only time I will drop down in line tests is I'll use a spinning rod. There are some occasions out here, like what we're going to show you this afternoon, where we're fishing open grass pockets in these flooded bays. In that case, a lot of times I will use a spinning rod. Some of these holes are 8, 9, 10 feet deep. There's not a lot of cover because I'm fishing on the outside edges. I'll go to a spinning rod and I'll use 12 pound fluorocarbon with a little heavier weight so I can stay in touch with that bottom. Some of the terminal tackle that I use is pretty standard fare for your drop shotting. The biggest difference is that I will go to a much heavier weight. I really do prefer the cylindrical weights. Mojo provides 2 types of systems for us today. They have the standard pressure clip-on type cylinder weights with the little barrel swivel in it. This is real good when you're using baits that tend to get twisted up on your line as you're pulling and dropping that bait down to the bottom. If you've got a bait on there that's not creating a lot of twist as you're reeling or casting it out and it's sinking to the bottom, I'll go to their spreader rig, which works real nice. That's this rig right here. It works real well bouncing in the rocks. We'll talk a little bit about that later in detail. And the hooks that I'm using, I use a variety of hooks. For the most part, when I'm out here on the Delta, I need to have a very stiff hook. So I'm using a series of circle hooks for the most part, octopus type hooks. It's the same kind of hooks we use when we're throwing live bait. Most of the rig that I'll use out here, I'll be nose hooking my baits and fishing them in open water, but there are some situations where I'll go to a much larger bait. I'll choose to use a Segoy worm and hook, either in a 1/0 or a 2/0, where I can actually Texas rig those baits and now make them weedless. Rigging a drop shot's actually pretty simple. First thing you want to do when you're rigging that hook is me being right-handed, I'm going to thread the line from right to left, and I always make sure that when I thread that line through, my hook point is on the opposite end of where I'm going to put that line through that eye. And there's also another reason for that. when you thread this thing through, it's very important that you want that hook, once it's tied, to be pointing in an upward or outward position. You don't want the hook to be pointing down. So I've found in tying these that when doing it in this fashion, it gives me the most success ratio in doing that. And what you always want to do when you tie this thing, you want to make sure you've got about an extra 18 to 20 inches. I'll put my finger through that line like that and pull it out. So I've got, you know, a good 18 to 20 inches on the side, because we're going to vary our drop. Most of the time we're right about 12, 13 inches is about right, but sometimes, you know, you need to get it up about 18 inches, as much as 20 inches up on top of that grass. What we're doing here is we're just going to tie a Palomar knot. You want to be very careful not to get a lot of line twists in the different tags that you got in your Palomar. Otherwise, you'll end up getting twists in that knot, and the hook will turn on you and not turn the way you want it. So you pull it through, and then before you pull that line tight, while you still got that loop, you want to get the hook through there, pull it up and over, and then pull it about halfway down. Then once you get it halfway down, take your tag end in one hand and pull the main line tight. That brings your knot down, and then flip it up and over. Just before it's snug, grab that hook and point it towards that end tag and pull tight. That'll get that hook pointed in that upward position. And if it tends to turn sideways like that, that's okay. You just grab that hook, slide that knot over, and give it a nice tug, and bang, now you're in position. The last thing that you have to do is you're going to put your weight on, and if we're going to go back to that knot, I know a lot of guys, they like to tie that extra loop in there. I personally don't really like to do that, because now you're putting, especially when I'm using fluorocarbon, because fluorocarbon is a very tough line. And when you create an extra loop in there to try and get that thing to go in its upward position so that hook point is pointed up, you create an extra loop and another potential for your line to cut. Fluorocarbon will cut through itself quite easily. But that's your basic knot there. Use a Palomar knot, and then we just take our little cylinder weight, pop that thing through there, and just give it a nice little tug into the stiff fashion there, and there you go. You've got your drop shotter rig all set up. It's that easy. And if you find that the fish want that bait a little closer to the bottom, you just drop it down, move it up your tag, and give it a little pop, and now your weight's in position. Now you've got that thing a little shorter. Now, more often than not, if I find that I'm getting to this point, I'll start with that weight down there towards the bottom of that tag, you know, 18, 19 inches, and then I'll move it up, move it up, move it up. And as I'm moving it up, if I'm starting to get bit, I'll start to take some of this excess tag off of here. Today, these fish, we're looking for these fish, they've been pretty effective at about that foot and a half range. So I'm going to pop that thing right in there. Kids, don't let your dentist see you do this. Not good for the old teeth, but when you get old like me and they're all fake, it works really well. But use your cutters, folks. That's what they're made for. As I do with most of my fishing, I like to try and keep things simple. You know, you can get out here with all the colored baits and so forth that we have available and really get caught up in that what bait, what color they eat and kind of thing out there. I try and keep my baits very simple. I use a series of light translucent baits. I get into the medium greens and green pumpkins, then I get into the darker browns and the black and reds and some purples and blues. But I try and stay in just this short spectrum of colors and choices, and I seem to be real lucky, if you will, at finding the right color with just that limited amount of choice. One of my favorite baits, I start off with my little reaper box. This is a little amber green paddle tail. It's watermelon green. It's got a little bit of red, a little bit of black, a little bit of gold flake. It's a little 3.5 inch bait. Works real well out here. Then I have a series of Mojo reefers. This is just a straight smoke reefer when those fish are on those schools of shad. Okay, I've got some brown with a little bit of green and red flake in there. We got a little bigger size. We got the green pumpkin. And these are Mojo reefers here. And of course I've got the good old black and red. You just can't be on this river without something black and red. Now when I get into worms, into my bigger worms, and I do like using bigger worms. Outside of these reefers here, I don't use too many of the smaller baits. I like using 6-inch worms and above. You know, the Robo FX worms are outstanding. Margarita Mutilator, brown and purple. The Delta is just a brown and purple lake, and you just can't go anywhere without a series of you know, Aaron's Magic baits. I have a couple of these short guys in here, and then some of the longer FX worms. But Aaron's Magic, that's a bait and choice that you can use out here on the river. Another one is, this is an old CO worm that I had poured many years ago that I have thousands of that work extremely well. It's kind of a brown with a little bit of pepper seed and a little chartreuse tail in it. Yamamoto's small cuttail worm, watermelon red. That's a favorite out here. You can throw watermelon red just about any day. I also, of course, the green pumpkin. And one of the ones that I'm having a lot of success with right now on the Delta is Yamamoto's cuttail in that 157. It's a smoke, a little bit of black and purple flake. Then of course I like the bigger baits. Yamamoto's new brown purple with a little bit of red flake, excellent bait. We've got the June Bug 213. That's another color that just works extremely well. These are the 7.5-inch cuttails. That's the root beer with red and gold. Excellent, excellent color out here in the summertime. Of course, we've got the watermelon green, we've got green pumpkin, and we've got watermelon red. And this is really all that I use while I'm out here. When I'm out here drop shotting on this Delta in the summertime, I can use one of these color combinations and any of these sizes of baits and catch fish all day long. The last thing I want to show you, there's two ways that I rig the majority of my baits. And then out here, for the most part, when I'm using the little circle hooks, little mosquito hooks, my most effective and favorite way is to just take that bait and nose hook it. Just nose hook it right in the little side there, right through the bait, and fish it like such. That works really well with all of these baits. You can actually, with this little circle hook, you can nose hook any of these. It kind of helps, you know, get that bait out away from your line. Gives it a lot of good action as it's out there and fluttering. You're not taking up, you know, an inch and a half part of the body of the bait, so the bait's allowed to flutter. I think it gives it a little bit more lively. One of the other things that it works really well, you know, and you can take those little 4-inch Yamamoto Senkos or Zoom trick worms or anything you want, you know, and you can actually wacky rig your baits as well. It's very effective out there drop shotting these baits in a wacky rig fashion. Those fish that get that tail moving on both ends, they will eat it. And then when I go to the bigger baits, when I go to these bigger 7-inch cuttails or even, you know, a dead ringer or a pow worm or something like that, this is when I'll go to that Yamamoto Sugoi hook, and I'll actually Texas rig that bait out there. If I'm fishing down in heavy cover, real thick weeds, like if I've got to be right in the middle of the weeds to catch those fish, then I'll go ahead and use that Texas rig setup like such for that. Works very good on these, especially these bigger baits. The Texas rig probably a little more effective on those bigger baits. All right, so now you've seen a little bit about what, hows, and whys. Let's see what we can do to go out and put all this together and catch some fish on the California Delta. Look at this one. That's nice. Look at this one. That's a nice fish, Internet. Look at that. Nice fish, Cooch. See there, Delta drop shot fish, folks. Just like clockwork. Got that Smoke 150 worm right out there on that first cast. Got a nice little chunky 2.5 pound fish. What do you think of that, huh? Let's go get some more, Rich. Okay. With me today is Rich McHugh, good friend of mine, everybody. We're out here doing a little drop shotting on the Delta.
I'm the novice at it. Never done it before in my life.
Well, Rich, one of the nice things about this technique, you know, is it's really a simple technique to use. It's great for kids, And it's great for those of us that don't know how to fish that don't do a lot of bass fishing, as well as it's an excellent technique for those of us who know what we're doing, because when the bite gets real tough, like I said, we're putting this bait in a zone those fish aren't used to seeing.
Okay, Cooch, what am I waiting for to feel? What do I feel when they hit?
Well, what you're going to feel more often than not, what you're going to feel is the line's just going to get heavy. You're going to be sitting there dragging that thing real slow on the bottom, staying in contact with the bottom, bouncing, 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 and all of a sudden your line's going to just load up. That rod tip's going to start going, and you'll feel them start to jerk. Sometimes you'll feel a little tap, 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 tap. You know, what might be like a bluegill in some cases. We catch a lot of bluegill out here that do that. Other times you'll feel a distinct boop, so it's just like fishing any other bait. You just got to be in tune, paying attention to your line, paying attention to what the rod's telling you. But more often than not, out here, these fish just come up and they just suck that bait in, because it's sitting there floating in front of them. It's not trying to get away. They just swim up and grab it real easy and take off with it. And one of the key things when you're out here, especially with these circle hooks like what we're using today, Rich, is you don't want to set the hook. That hook's exposed. So all you do is just load up the rod real easy and start reeling. Okay?
Let's see if I can catch one.
Let's get you on some fish. The key with this, Rich, is not to fish that bait too hard. I notice you're jerking. Just give it little, see how I just give it little pops. Just give it little pops. You want that bait to sit there. Remember, we're trying to keep that bait in the strike zone. We want it down there where that fish ain't used to seeing it. And actually, sometimes you can just let it sit there like you're bait fishing. And then just give it little pops using your wrist.
Just use the tip of the pole?
Just use the tip just to give the line a little bit of jerk. Because you'd be surprised how much rod movement creates down there on that bait. The slightest little movement of your rod tip gets that worm down there to dancing. When you jerk it, it really pulls it and takes it out of the strike zone.
Makes it unnatural?
Yeah, kinda. He ain't a big one. He was so big, he couldn't fit that doggone little reaper in his mouth. To see what happened now, I went to that little smaller bait. You notice the last couple bites that I've gotten, now that I've gone to that smaller reaper, you can see what happens to the size of the fish. Boy, I like fishing those little bigger baits. Little bigger baits tend to get a little bigger bites. This is a little good. This is a nice fish.
Yeah.
This is a real nice fish.
Here, I got it. That's a nice fish.
California drop shot fish on the river, guys.
It's
a good solid 3-pounder. See, I went to that big watermelon red, bang, first cast on a point of that grass, that fish was sitting right out there, suspended on that grass pocket. Nice California Delta bass on a drop shot. We've had quite a few of those here today, Rich, in this little spot.
Yeah,
and you might want to try getting one of those big watermelon, one of them watermelon red ones on there. They seem to be picking that one up pretty good.
I was already heading that direction, Coach.
Fish. Did you get one, Rich?
No, on grass.
There's one.
Not quite as big as your last one.
There's another one there. Just a little skinny male. That fish done spawned and been out and probably spawned a second or third time. His mouth is all beat up here from roosting. It's like fishing a Senko. The key really is just let it sit there and not do anything. Keep it in that strike zone. When I'm throwing that bait, I'm looking right on that weed line. I'm fishing that weed line, and I just give it a slightest little plop just to get that bait to wave, and then just let it sit there. And as the wind is drifting us away, I'll take up the slack and keep that line taut, but I want that bait sitting right on the bottom. I want that bait just sitting right down there where those fish are, and try not to fish it too much. I think if you fish it too much, it's down there doing just way too many things. Those fish just aren't going to eat it. They want that bait just sitting right there doing absolutely nothing right now. The more I fish this bait, the less strikes I get. I found that if I just let it sit there, eventually they'll see it floating and they'll come and get it. The other thing is, I think, Rich, you got a little too much distance there. Grab that tag out of that weight and pull that weight up about 8 inches.
You just pull it?
Yeah, just get it. Just here. Just pull that down and shorten it up.
Push it closer to the bottom?
Yeah, that way that bait gets closer to the bottom. Pull this fish. Go this way. A little smaller. Drop shot. They're liking that watermelon red. There he is, little guy. You will catch a lot of little fish on this Delta drop shotting, but mixed in with those, you'll catch a lot of good quality fish. That's that deep drop right there again. Big, giant Delta bass eating drop shots. That bass isn't any bigger than that worm. That bass is going to be 10 pounds someday. He keeps going after food fords like that, he's going to be a 10-pounder someday. There's a nice fish. Let's see what we got here. Well, there you go, folks. We've got some really nice fish out here in this little pond today. We're out in the California Delta. We're drop shotting, Cooch's Bubba style. Give it a try. You'll catch fish out here all day long, and you'll catch good quality fish.